I need to write this down while I can still tell what's real. While the room is in one of its normal states. I don't know how long I have before the next blackout, and I've started to notice how the details slip from my memory once the light comes back on. If I don't keep a record, I'll lose track of what's happening altogether. I want this to read like a testimony, like evidence. So I'll begin at the start before things changed. I moved into the room 3 weeks ago. At the time, it felt like a lucky break. Rent was cheap, too cheap, if I'm honest, and the landlord didn't ask many questions. He was an older man, stiff in his movements, his voice low and gravelly, like his throat was coated in dust. He showed me the room quickly, barely speaking, as if he wanted to spend as little time inside as possible. "This one's available. Take it or leave it," he muttered. The room itself seemed fine. Small, rectangular, maybe 15 by 10 feet. Wooden floors warped with age. A single window facing the alley. A bed frame with a thin mattress. A standing lamp in the corner. One door that opened to a narrow hallway leading back to the stairs. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. But I was desperate. My old place had been condemned after a fire in the next unit. I didn't have the money for a decent apartment. So when a landlord offered this place for half of what anyone else would charge, I didn't think twice. I wish I had. The first night was uneventful until I turned out the light. I remember lying down, the mattress springs squeaking under my weight. The lamp gave off a sickly yellow glow, buzzing faintly, and when I switched it off, the room dropped into complete darkness. Not city dark, where light pollution softens the edges, but absolute black, like someone had covered my face with a cloth. I told myself it was just because the window faced a dead-end alley. No street lamps, no neon signs, just brick walls and shadows. But in that darkness, the room felt different. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The bed seemed farther from the wall. The air smelled mustier, heavier, as if the room had swelled around me. When I reached out toward the nightstand, my hand met empty space where the lamp should have been. I groped blindly for several seconds before my fingers brushed it, except it wasn't where I remembered leaving it. It was a foot to the left, maybe more. I sat up, confused, trying to orient myself. My heart thudded, and for the first time that night, I wished I'd left a second light on. When I flicked the lamp back on, the room looked normal, perfectly normal. Bed, window, lamp in its place. I convinced myself it was just exhaustion, stress, a trick of my half-asleep brain. I was wrong. Over the next few nights, it kept happening. Whenever the lights went out, the room seemed to breathe. The walls felt closer, then farther away. The window sometimes seemed higher on the wall, sometimes lower. The door creaked in a different place, its handle brushing my arm as I passed, when I could swear it hadn't the night before. The changes were subtle at first, easy to dismiss. But on the fifth night, I noticed something that made denial impossible. I had left my phone charging on the nightstand. When I woke up around 3 a.m., I reached for it, half asleep, to check the time. But the nightstand wasn't there. My hand swept through empty air. I leaned further, expecting to find it, but instead, my shoulder banged into the wall. Confused, I sat up, fumbling for the lamp. When the light flared on, the nightstand was back where it belonged. Phone plugged in, screen glowing faintly, but my shoulders still ached from hitting the wall. Something wasn't right. I told myself I was overreacting. Stress and fatigue do strange things. Maybe I had rolled in my sleep, shifted sideways on the mattress without realizing. Maybe my brain was filling in gaps when I reached for the lamp. But doubt festered. Every night, I went to bed dreading the darkness. I began leaving the lamp on, even though it buzzed and flickered annoyingly. I told myself it was for convenience, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid of what happened when the lights went out. I didn't want to admit that the room was different in the dark. Everything escalated the following week. It was raining hard, wind howling down the alley when the power went out. The lamp sputtered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into total blackness. And the moment it did, I felt it. The room shifted beneath me, not subtly this time. It lurched like a ship caught in a wave. My stomach dropped as if I'd fallen several feet. The air changed, heavier, damper, filled with the stink of mold. I scrambled off the bed, hands outstretched, trying to find the door. But the wall was farther than it should have been. My fingers brushed rough plaster where there should have been smooth wood. Panic surged. I staggered sideways, certain I was disoriented, but nothing was where it belonged. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, faint but deliberate, somewhere in the dark, like wood dragging against wood, or furniture being pushed slowly across the floor. I froze, held my breath. The sound stopped. Then something whispered. I didn't catch the words. It was too soft, too close to the edge of hearing. But it was a voice, low, murmuring, from the far corner of the room. I bolted toward where I thought the door was, crashing into the nightstand, sending my phone clattering across the floor. Pain shot up my shin, but I didn't stop. I clawed at the wall until I found the door frame, yanked the handle, and stumbled into the hallway. A second later, the power flicked back on. Behind me, the room looked perfectly normal, but I couldn't forget the whisper. From that night on, I couldn't sleep. I started leaving the overhead light on in addition to the lamp. When I closed my eyes, I kept them half open, just enough to know I wouldn't wake in darkness. But it wasn't enough. I needed to prove something was happening. I began making sketches of the room every night before bed, exact measurements of where the furniture was, distances between objects, even small details like scratches in the floorboards. And sure enough, every morning the sketches didn't match. The nightstand was a few inches closer, the window slightly larger, the door a fraction narrower. It was subtle, but measurable. The room was shifting. After the sketches, I tried recordings. I set my phone camera to record overnight, propped against a stack of books. The first night, nothing happened. 8 hours of footage showing me tossing and turning under the blanket. The second night, the battery died after 4 hours. The third night, the recording was corrupted. Black screen, audio only, and in the audio, scraping, dragging, whispering. At first, faint, barely audible. But then, around the 2-hour mark, a voice clear enough to make out. It said my name. I showed the recording to a friend the next day. She frowned, listened closely, then shook her head. It's just interference. Maybe you had the phone too close to the lamp. White noise, man. You're scaring yourself. But she didn't sleep in that room. She didn't feel it lurch when the lights went out. And she didn't hear her own name whispered in the dark. Tonight, as I write this, the lamp flickers more than usual. The air feels heavy, expectant. The room wants me to turn off the light. I don't know how much longer I can resist, but I need to know what happens if I let it. I need to know what the room becomes when the lights go out. I try to tell myself I was imagining it, The mind plays tricks when you're tired, when stress knots itself around your ribs like wire, when you're alone in a room that already feels too old, too forgotten. I repeated that mantra as if it were a shield. Nothing is wrong. The room is the same. I'm the one who is wrong. But something inside me resisted the comfort of that lie. I knew what I saw. The first night was too clear. The desk had been against the wall to the left when I entered, but after the lights went out, after I fumbled and switched them back on, it was against the opposite wall. Furniture does not move silently across the floor without being dragged. It does not rearrange itself when your back is turned. The second night, I made an effort to prepare. I bought a notebook from the small shop down the street, a cheap thing with faded blue lines and a cracked spine. On the first page, I drew a careful diagram of the room as it appeared when the lights were on. Bed in the far corner. Desk by the window. Chair pushed neatly beneath. Small wardrobe by the door. I labeled everything, even the wastebasket. I measured the lengths of the walls with a tape measure I borrowed from a neighbor who eyed me strangely but asked no questions. At 9:30, I shut off the light. The sound of the switch snapping down echoed louder than it should have, as though the walls were listening. Darkness fell instantly and wholly, as if the room had swallowed itself. I sat in the dark, heartbeat loud, palms sweaty, clutching the notebook like a talisman. For 5 minutes, I forced myself to endure it. The silence was not silence. The creak of wood under unseen weight. A faint scratch, scratch that could have been pipes or could have been nails against the plaster. I counted the seconds, lips moving silently. When I reached 300, I snapped the light back on. The bed was in the wrong place. It was not subtle this time. It had shifted at least 2 feet closer to the window, the sheets dragging across the floor. The wardrobe leaned slightly, angled as though it had been pushed. The desk was still by the window, but the chair faced the door instead of being tucked beneath. I remember whispering aloud, though no one could have heard me. This is not real. This is not real. I sketched the new arrangement in my notebook. My hand shook so badly the lines wavered. Beneath the sketch I wrote, in large frantic letters, IT moved again. That was the first night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the furniture creeping across the room in the dark, dragging itself to new positions with a will not my own. I tried to laugh at myself, tried to imagine some prank or mistake. But the sound of that scratching would not leave my ears. By the third night, I had devised a system. I placed coins along the floor in a neat line by the bed. I stacked books at the base of the desk. I wedged the chair against the wardrobe so that if it moved, the crash would wake me. I even tied a length of thread from the doorknob to the bed frame, a fragile string that would snap if anything shifted. At 10 o'clock sharp, I killed the lights. The black was immediate, suffocating. I could not see the line of coins. I could not see my hand when I raised it in front of my face. For a while I listened. The building seemed alive with noises. A sigh in the ceiling. A faint groan in the floorboards. Then came a dragging sound. Slow, deliberate. A weight pulled across wood. My body froze. I wanted to move, to leap up and strike the switch, but something inside me urged silence, as if to acknowledge the sound would make it worse. The dragging went on, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I must have lasted no more than 2 minutes before I scrambled up, nearly tearing the thread from the door, and flicked the light back on. The bed had moved again. This time it stood diagonally, its headboard almost touching the middle of the wall. The wardrobe leaned even further, casting a warped shadow across the floor. The coins I had lined so carefully were scattered in random places, one lodged beneath the leg of the chair. The stack of books by the desk had toppled in a direction that made no sense, as if they had been knocked over by a gust of wind in a sealed room. The thread was broken. I remember standing in the center of the room, notebook clutched in hand, and realizing I was shaking. Not trembling with nerves, but shaking as though the ground itself vibrated beneath me. My eyes darted from wall to wall, expecting to see them shift in front of me, but nothing moved. The room was still again, as if mocking me. I wrote furiously in the notebook, each word carved into the paper. It wants me to see. The days blurred together after that. I would leave the apartment in the morning, wander the city streets until late afternoon, anything to avoid returning too soon. I ate little. My hands shook when I paid for food. Strangers gave me looks I could not decipher. The world outside seemed too stable, too fixed in comparison to the nightmare of that shifting room. But night always came, and with night came the dark. On the 5th night, I attempted something desperate. I set my phone to record video and placed it on the desk facing the room. I wanted proof. Proof that I was not losing my mind, that something tangible was happening. I lay on the bed and whispered to the air that I would not be fooled tonight. Then I turned off the lamp. The dark devoured me. The scratching began almost instantly. Not on the walls this time, but directly beside the bed, as though nails dragged slowly across the wood. I clenched my fists, jaw locked, forcing myself to stay still. Then came the dragging. Louder this time. Closer. I could feel vibration through the mattress. And then silence. The worst silence of all. When I could bear it no longer, I snapped the light on. The room had shifted into something unrecognizable. The desk was gone. The wardrobe stood where the desk had been, its door cracked open like a mouth. The bed had moved flush against the opposite wall, though I had not felt myself shift with it. The chair lay on its side in the center of the room. My phone was no longer on the desk. It lay on the floor, screen cracked, video still recording. My hand shook as I picked it up. The recording showed nothing but black, a void without sound. As though the camera had been blind to the changes, as though the darkness it captured was a different darkness than the one I lived in. I deleted the video that night, not out of frustration, but fear. Something about the blank footage felt worse than seeing movement would have. By the 6th night, I began to hear the whispers. At first they were faint, beneath the creaking and scratching. Breaths that were not mine. A murmur too soft to understand. But each time the lights went out, the voices grew stronger. They circled the room, weaving through the black, never clear enough to form words, but always near enough to raise the hair on my arms. I stopped sleeping entirely. The room seemed to know. It shifted more violently the less I slept. Entire walls appeared closer, narrower, the ceiling lower. Sometimes the door seemed farther away than it had before, a trick of perspective that lingered even with the lights on. I began to wonder if the room only moved in darkness, or if it was slowly warping itself around me in daylight too, inch by inch, waiting until I would not notice until it was too late. By the end of the week, I wrote in my notebook with a kind of manic certainty. The room is alive. The room does not like the light. The room is watching. I do not know why I'm still here. Any rational person would have fled by now. But something keeps me tethered. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps fear disguised as duty. Or perhaps the room itself does not want me to leave. On the 8th night, I found something carved into the wall. 3 words, faint but undeniable, as though etched by a desperate hand. Do not stay. I traced them with my fingertips until my skin went cold. The voices whispered louder than ever that night. The words carved into the wall haunted me more than any movement of the furniture. Do not stay. I kept tracing them in the daytime, fingers over the grooves, as though feeling the desperation of the one who had etched them. It was not shallow. Whoever had done it had dug deep, as if trying to cut through the plaster itself, as if clawing their warning into the bones of the building. And yet I stayed. Every morning I told myself I would leave, pack my bag, hand the keys to the landlord, and never look back. But by evening, something compelled me to stay. Some heaviness, some unseen hand pushing against my chest. My feet would not move toward the door. My hands would not pack the bag. I remained, always waiting for night. I do not think the room would have let me go. By the 9th night, the changes had grown grotesque. When I turned off the light, I no longer heard just scratching or dragging. I heard breathing, slow, ragged, patient, sometimes behind the wardrobe, sometimes beneath the bed, sometimes right beside my ear. I would hold my breath, heart hammering, until my lungs screamed, then flick the light back on. The room would always be different. That night, it was not just the furniture. It was the walls. The far corners stretched away, elongating like a hallway that had not been there before. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, but the perspective remained. A corridor extended out of the corner, pale and narrow, fading into darkness. I stood frozen at the edge of the bed, notebook in my lap, the lamp still buzzing overhead. My legs itched to move closer, to see if the hallway was real, but terror held me down. After several minutes of staring, I convinced myself it was an illusion. My mind was unraveling. Nothing more. I crawled under the blankets, clutching the notebook like a child with a stuffed toy. But the hallway was still there in the morning. Not as deep, not as visible, just a faint seam where the walls should have met. I touched it with trembling hands. It was solid plaster, but the angles were wrong. The corner was no longer a right angle. It bent inward, a subtle distortion as though the wall had been pushed. I told myself not to test it again, not to turn the lights off. But I did. On the 10th night, the hallway had lengthened. It yawned open into darkness, too real to dismiss as a trick. I could feel the draft coming from it, a breath of cold air that smelled of dust and mildew, the scent of closed spaces long sealed. I should have stayed on the bed. I should have kept the light on and ignored it. But I walked forward, step by slow step, until I stood before the opening. My heart pounded so violently I thought I might collapse. The notebook slipped from my fingers, landing on the warped floorboards. The air was colder inside. I remember whispering into the void, a single word I did not mean to speak. Hello. The darkness answered with silence. But it was not empty silence. It was listening. I took one more step. The boards creaked beneath my weight, echoing too long, as if bouncing off walls I could not see. My breath clouded in the cold. I reached out and touched the wall to my right. It was damp. My fingertips came away wet. The lamp in the bedroom flickered, then went out. The hallway swallowed me whole. I do not remember how long I walked. It could have been minutes or hours. The corridor bent and twisted, narrow then wide, always turning me in directions that made no sense. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed door frames ahead, but when I reached them, they were only shadows. The whispers grew louder the deeper I went. Not voices exactly, more like the suggestion of voices. The echo of language stripped of meaning. They seeped into my bones until I could not tell if they were behind me or inside me. At some point, panic surged and I ran. My hands slapped against the walls as I stumbled forward, searching for an exit. Then, impossibly, I burst into light. I was back in the room. The lamp burned steadily overhead. The bed was in its usual place. The wardrobe stood silently by the door. But the notebook lay in the center of the floor where I had dropped it at the threshold. I wrote for hours after that, manic scribbles across page after page. I could not stop my hand. The words poured out like blood from a wound. Over and over I wrote the same phrase. The room is bigger in the dark. The next days blurred together. I ate little. My eyes sank into dark hollows. The neighbors, when I passed them in the hallway, stepped back as though my presence chilled them. I overheard whispers about me, real ones, not the ones in the dark. The man in 3B is losing his mind. He never sleeps. He talks to himself. If only they knew. By the 12th night, the room no longer waited for me to turn off the light. The distortions bled into daylight. The walls pulsed faintly, swelling like the rhythm of breath. The corners bent more sharply. I swore I could see movement in the wardrobe mirror. Not my reflection, but something behind me, something just out of focus. I avoided the mirror after that. When the light finally did go out that night, I did not bother fighting. I sat cross-legged on the floor, notebook before me, pen in hand, and waited. The room shifted violently. The bed scraped across the floor. The wardrobe toppled with a crash. The air filled with dust and whispers. And then the wall before me cracked open like splitting flesh. Another corridor, wider this time, lit faintly by a sourceless glow. I entered without hesitation. The walls here were not plaster but stone, damp and slick. My footsteps echoed too loud. The ceiling dripped. The smell of rot was overwhelming, thick and cloying. I passed markings on the walls, symbols carved deep, circles and jagged lines, none of which I recognized. At intervals, I saw words scratched into the stone, fragments of pleas. Help me. Not real. Let me out. I realized I was not the first. Others had walked these halls. Others had been swallowed by the shifting room. Some had tried to leave messages. None had escaped. I stumbled deeper. My chest grew tight, lungs burning in the damp air. The whispers pressed closer, now forming words I could almost understand. They said my name, over and over, my name, spoken in voices that did not belong to me. I broke into a run again, desperate to escape the suffocating voices. The halls twisted and shifted with every step. Left became right, up became down. The floor lurched beneath me as though the labyrinth breathed. Then, abruptly, I emerged back into the bedroom once more. But it was not the same bedroom. The bed was wrong. Smaller. The sheets different. The wardrobe was missing. And the window overlooked a street I had never seen before, lined with buildings that leaned at impossible angles. On the wall beside the bed hung a framed photograph. A man stood in the image, gaunt and wide-eyed, his hand gripping a notebook identical to mine. I stared at the picture until nausea twisted in my stomach. The man in the photograph was me. When I blinked, the photograph was gone. Only a blank wall remained. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching the notebook so tightly the spine cracked. My mind screamed at me to flee, to force myself out of the apartment and into the world beyond, no matter what waited outside. But my body did not move. The whispers filled the silence again, louder than ever, chanting in a chorus that made the floor vibrate. Stay, stay, stay. I wrote those words until the page tore beneath the pen. The room has grown. It will keep growing. It wants me inside it, and I think I am beginning to want that too. The voices do not leave me now. Even in daylight, they linger, murmuring faintly just below the surface of my thoughts. Sometimes I cannot tell which thoughts are mine and which belong to the whispers. They slip between the cracks of my mind, wearing my memories like masks, replaying words I once spoke years ago, spoken back to me in voices that are not mine but know me intimately. When I try to sleep, they rise like a tide. When I eat, they echo my chewing. When I breathe, they inhale and exhale with me. I am never alone, not in waking, not in sleep, not in the fragile moments between. The room does not shift only at night anymore. It groans and swells under the sun, plaster warping, angles tightening. The seams in the corners split wider, opening glimpses of blackness. I no longer bother trying to measure or draw diagrams. The notebook is filled with frantic sketches that no longer resemble the room, just wild lines, hallways that loop into themselves, doorways that lead nowhere, spirals that bleed off the page. It was on the 15th night that I first saw them. I had forced myself to stay awake, sitting on the bed with the lamp glowing dimly above. My eyelids grew heavy, head nodding forward. When I snapped awake, heart stuttering, the room was not the same. The lamp still glowed, but its light seemed smothered, weak against the shadows. The wardrobe had shifted closer, leaning toward the bed like a watching sentinel. The air was damp and cold, and someone was sitting in the chair. I froze, eyes locked on the figure. At first I thought it was only a shadow, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a person, thin, slouched, head tilted down as though asleep. I whispered a soundless plea for it not to move. My skin prickled with a terror so intense, I thought my heart might stop. Then it raised its head. The face that looked back at me was my own. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, skin pale as wax. My lips moved soundlessly in perfect imitation of my own breath. Then they twisted into a smile that did not belong to me. The lamp flickered, and when the light steadied again, the chair was empty. I did not sleep for 3 days after that. But they returned. Not one, not only the reflection of myself, but many. Each time the lights went out, I caught glimpses in the corners. Figures shifting in the dark, shapes hunched against the walls, outlines crouching in the widened seams of the room. Sometimes when I turned on the light, I could still see them for a fraction of a second, too quick for the eye to capture, but too real to dismiss. They were always me, or fragments of me. Some looked older, some younger, some twisted as though broken in ways I had not yet been broken. They did not speak, not with mouths, but I could hear them whispering inside my skull. They repeated the same words over and over. Stay, stay, stay. I stopped leaving the apartment. Food no longer mattered. The outside world felt like an illusion, a stage I had wandered off from. The real place was here, in this shifting prison. Outside was only a dream, temporary and thin. On the 17th night, I ventured back into the corridors. The wall cracked open without hesitation when the light fell away, revealing the stone passage that waited like an open wound. I stepped inside willingly this time. The damp closed around me, the whispers echoing off stone. My footsteps followed me like a second person. The deeper I went, the more the corridors branched. Some narrowed into suffocating squeezes. Others opened into vast rooms too large to exist inside a building. In one such room, the ceiling soared into blackness. My lamplight barely touched the floor. That was where I saw the first of the carvings. They covered the stone walls, words gouged so violently the surface bled dust. I ran my hands over them, mouth dry. They were in many different handwritings, some frantic and jagged, others neat and careful. I am still here. It copies me. I cannot tell which one is me anymore. Stay in the light. The final message was different. It was not carved, but written in dark stains that might once have been blood. It wants to wear you. I stumbled back, ball rising in my throat. My hands shook so violently the lamp wavered, shadows stretching across the floor. For a moment, I thought the shadows were moving on their own, separating from my body. That was when I saw them clearly for the first time. Dozens of figures lining the walls. Some crouched, some standing, some curled into the corners like broken dolls. All of them bore my face. Their eyes glowed faintly in the half-light, reflecting like those of animals. Their mouths moved in silence, opening and closing like fish. The whispers filled the chamber, overlapping, 1,000 versions of my own voice hissing the same word. Stay. My body locked. I could not move. The whispers pressed into my skull, overlapping into a chorus. Stay. 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 One of them stepped forward. Its movements were wrong, jerky as though strings pulled it. Its face was a distorted version of mine, jaw too wide, teeth too many. It reached a hand toward me, fingers too long, skin hanging loose from bone. I stumbled back, lamp shaking, and screamed. The sound echoed across the chamber, and the figures swayed as one, mouths stretching wider, the whispering intensifying into a roar that filled every inch of me. I turned and ran. The corridors twisted, lengthened, swallowed me whole. The lamp flickered and died, plunging me into blackness. Hands brushed my shoulders in the dark, cold fingers sliding across my skin. Faces leaned close, breathing against my ear. I stumbled blindly, smashing against walls, knees scraping stone. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, I was back in the room. The bed stood in its place. The wardrobe was upright again. The lamp shone steadily above. My notebook lay on the floor, pages fluttering as if caught by a wind that did not exist. But I was not alone. They stood in the corners. Not dozens, not hundreds, but 3, clearer than before. Solid. Each one a different version of me. One sat hunched on the bed, eyes sunken. One crouched by the door, mouth twitching into a silent laugh. One stood by the window, fingers scratching slowly at the glass. I whispered to myself that they were not real, not real, not real. But they did not vanish. The one on the bed raised its head. Its lips moved. The sound that left its mouth was my own voice, but stretched, warped, as though played on broken tape. You're not you anymore. The one at the window dragged its nail down the glass with a screech that made my teeth ache. The one by the door tilted its head and grinned. I covered my ears and screamed until the sound of my voice drowned everything. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty again. Empty, but not safe, because I could still hear them. Not outside, not around me, but inside. When I looked into the mirror that night, I did not recognize my reflection. My eyes were too dark, too hollow. My face did not match the way it felt from the inside. The whispers told me the truth. The room does not shift around me. The room shifts me, and I am beginning to wonder if I was ever me at all. The room has stopped pretending to be a room. For nights, I tried convincing myself that there were limits to what it could do, that its shifting was bound by some kind of architecture, some hidden logic I just hadn't uncovered yet. I charted walls, marked the floor with chalk, even drove nails into the plaster thinking they would stay when I looked away. None of it mattered. Every time the light left, the walls stretched, bent, retracted, or disappeared entirely, taking my markings with them. Now, the boundaries no longer wait for darkness. They twitch even when the bulb glows. Corners sag as if gravity tugs in directions my body doesn't recognize. Sometimes a hallway yawns open where there was once a flat wall, then seals itself like a wound before I can decide whether to step through. It doesn't feel like a room anymore. It feels like something alive, something trying to unlearn its disguise. I've been awake for 70 hours. Sleep is suicide here. The last time I dozed off, I woke to find the ceiling an inch from my face, pressing down as though it meant to suffocate me. By the time I scrambled upright, gasping, the ceiling had retreated to its usual position, but the air reeked of dust and something older, almost metallic. There is no sound except the hum of the bulb and my own breathing. No outside traffic, no neighbors, no wind against windows. The world beyond these walls has stopped announcing itself, and I'm no longer sure there is a world out there at all. The notes I've been keeping don't help. Page after page of sketches, floor plans, crude measurements, all useless. The room changes them, too. Words I wrote hours ago bleed into symbols I don't remember drawing. Shapes like crooked ladders, spirals broken halfway through, triangles stacked upside down. I don't know if my hand draws them while I'm not aware, or if the room itself alters the pages when I'm not looking. I tried burning one of the pages to stop it. The flames went out, not like they'd been smothered, but like the fire had been swallowed. And that's when I heard it. Not a voice. Not at first. It was like breathing, but deeper, older. A vibration that traveled through the floor and into my ribs until my own body resonated with it. The bulb flickered once, then held steady, but the walls were trembling as if straining against something I wasn't supposed to see. I whispered to myself just to break the silence, to remind myself I still had a mouth, a voice. The sound barely left my throat before it was drowned out. Then came the words. Not in any language I've learned, but I understood them. The room was speaking, not to me, but through me like my bones had become its instrument. I can't repeat the words, not because I've forgotten, but because they resist being remembered in sequence. When I try, my tongue locks, and my stomach lurches as if I'll vomit. What I can say is this. It was telling me to follow. The next blackout came without warning. The bulb didn't flicker. It died. The instant the room went dark, I felt the floor tilt. Not slightly, not like a shifting foundation, It tilted so violently I was thrown to the wall, or what I thought was a wall. My hands landed on something warm, something that pulsed. The smell of earth filled my nose, damp and raw, as if I had fallen into a pit that had been sealed for centuries. I crawled, hands outstretched, knowing that crawling meant surrender, but standing meant being swallowed whole. The ground beneath me wasn't wood anymore. It was soft, spongy like soil mixed with flesh. My palms came away slick, though I couldn't see what clung to them. Somewhere ahead I saw a glow, dim like moonlight through fog. It moved when I moved, as though it was retreating, daring me to chase. The voice in my bones grew louder. I reached a stairwell, though it had no handrails, no supports, just steps hanging in blackness. They angled downward, spiraling. I didn't question where they led. Questions had no use here anymore. Step after step, the air grew colder, pressing tighter against my chest. The glow became clearer, until I saw it wasn't a single light at all, but thousands of tiny points hovering. For a moment, I thought they were stars, that the stairwell had somehow deposited me beneath the open sky. But stars don't breathe. These did. Each light expanded and contracted in rhythm, as though they were lungs. And as I stared, I realized they weren't floating in the distance, they were eyes. The weight of their attention forced me to my knees. My skull ached as if the thoughts inside it weren't mine anymore. The eyes blinked in unison, and the room shifted again. I wasn't underground. I wasn't in a stairwell. I was back in my room. The bed, the bulb, the peeling wallpaper. Everything was as it had been, except the walls were gone. They stretched out infinitely, as if my room had been peeled open and grafted onto an endless plane. The bulb above me flickered, trying to illuminate an ocean of shifting walls that kept rearranging, folding into themselves, spreading out like a maze without end. And the eyes were still there, embedded in every surface. I don't remember how long I stayed there, staring back at them. Time doesn't bend here the way it does in the world outside. Every second stretches, but at the same time, whole hours collapse into blinks. What finally broke me was the sound. The eyes whispered, not one at a time, but together, a chorus so low it vibrated my teeth. They whisper my name, over and over, louder and louder until the sound was no longer sound. It was a force pushing me flat against the floor. I tried cover my ears. It didn't help. The voice wasn't outside. It was inside, echoing through every hollow of my body. Then silence. The bulb above me steadied. The wall shrank back into place. The bed, the floor, the corners all returned. For a brief, impossible moment, I thought it was over, until I saw the clock. When I entered this room, the date was March 9th. The clock now read June 23rd. 3 months have passed, but I remember every second of it as one unbroken moment. I should leave. I know that. But when I try, the door doesn't open to the hallway anymore. It opens to more room. Always more room. Each time the arrangement changes, offering me a different shape, a different lie. I can't leave because there is nowhere to leave to. The room isn't shifting anymore. I am. I feel my bones move when the light goes out. My skin doesn't fit the same way. I catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, and the reflection lags, as if it's deciding whether to follow. The whispers no longer wait for the dark. They speak even in daylight, in the spaces between my own thoughts. I'm not alone in here. I was never alone. The room has been teaching me, reshaping me. and I'm beginning to understand what it wants. It doesn't need walls. It doesn't need corners or ceilings or floors. The room is not a place. The room is a hunger, and it has chosen me to carry it. I don't know when the last light will go out, but I can feel it coming. When it does, there will be no room left at all. Only me, and I will open